Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is Positively Atheist, and I'm coming at you tonight to discuss the cosmological argument. And this argument has been rephrased multiple times throughout the centuries by theists and Christian apologists, Muslim apologists, and all kinds of other religions will use this argument. And it comes in different forms, but the whole premise is basically, hey, look, everything we see around us seems to always have some kind of cause, and if you go back far enough, that cause needs that eventual final point needs the initial cause, something that started off. And the technical argument goes something like this: everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, and thereby the universe has a cause. Okay, so this is here's the thing. As an atheist, I totally understand this argument, understand where people are coming from with this, because everything around us seems to point to some type of initial cause. I totally understand it, because think about it. In your life, every event that happens, everything that you see happens has an explanation, right? If you go back a step, there's something that caused that thing. You know, if a child's born, we know how that happens. That means a woman conceived through some type of interaction with a man, and now you have a child. Or this is how trees are reproduced. You have trees because two trees interact in a certain way, create a seed, and that seed grows up to be a tree. And you know, this conversation comes up a lot, especially when you're dealing with people who are just kind of getting started with thinking about these concepts. And this is really seen a lot of times, especially like in children. The children will ask a question, well, hey, mom and dad, where did the trees come from? And you'll explain, oh, they came from a previous tree. And they'll say, well, where did that tree come from? And you'll say, well, it came from another tree. And they'll say, well, and they'll keep going back. And you can do this with any subject matter. You can do this with any topic. And what will happen is, inevitably, you'll get to the point where you whittle down causal relationship after causal relationship to the point where you get to a single event. And we're going to call that, for the sake of conversation, point zero. So as you can see in this diagram, this is the current model of the Big Bang Theory. That I shouldn't say the current model. I'll get into that in a moment. But this is the standard model of what most people think of when they think of the Big Bang, and basically how we have come into being. So if you look here, at this point here, I think my next slide, we're going to call this, that point I was referring to, we'll call it point zero, meaning every single thing, every single action, interaction, every event boils down to the single solitary point. And this is what God has been reduced to. God started off originally with humans being all about controlling everything. You know, a long time ago, people thought God controlled every aspect of life, every single interaction, right? Well, as science has come along, it's come along and shown us that, hey, there's actually some really good explanations for all these different interactions we see, and there's a very good natural explanation. So what's happened is a cosmological argument has been resurfaced more and more, because God has essentially gotten pushed back to this point zero. People are essentially saying, look, I understand you don't really need God to explain reproduction. You don't need God to explain all these things. But there's one thing you still can't explain, and that is what caused the original event, which is the singularity, point zero. What came before this moment? Now, I'm going to get into a little philosophy about why that's actually a silly question in a moment. But we're going to talk a little about terms first. So typically when we're having these discussions, people are talking about what we call the universe. Now, this is kind of a poor use of word when we're having this conversation, because the universe really doesn't describe what we need it to describe, right? Because scientists have really kind of come to the understanding, and even if we don't have the necessary evidence for it, at least theoretically speaking, the universe doesn't really cover much. A better word might be considered the cosmos, because the cosmos covers a lot more than just what we see here. In fact, the word cosmos can cover a lot more than that. It can cover the idea of there being a multiverse, the idea that one universe gives rise to the next universe, and so forth, right? And this just keeps going on perpetuity. Cosmos is a little better word for that because it's more inclusive, because we're trying to come up with a word, because what we're discussing here in the cosmological argument is this idea that every single thing has to have an explanation. And the reason why I bring up this is because initially the argument against the cosmological approach was to say, well, hey, we really don't need God to explain the beginning, because we can just interject this idea of eternal cosmos, essentially, that universes create universes and that kind of stuff. But the question would still be asked, well, what started the very first one? At some point, you're going to have to get to a point where you have to have an explanation for the very, very first event. You have to have a cause for that. And this is what the cosmological argument is about. So cosmos might be a little bit better word, but I'm going to explain that a little bit more. But before we do, I want to get into a little clarification. First and foremost, the idea that reality itself had a beginning is not accepted by the vast scientific community anymore. It actually appears to break several laws of nature as that we currently understand. Like, for instance, energy can't be created or destroyed. There's this concept in science that basically said, the thing is, like, you can't act, as far as we can tell in reality, energy can't actually be destroyed or created. It can only be converted into different states. So this idea that that there was ever a potential state of nothingness with nothing in it is problematic, because then in order to start things, you have to basically break one of the fundamental laws of nature. Now, we're going to get into that and why that's an important part in just a few moments. But I do want to just bring that up, that this is actually kind of an outdated philosophy in a sense of scientists don't really think that everything starts. Now, it might be true that our local expression of reality, meaning our local universe, did have a finite beginning. That doesn't mean, as I showed in the previous slide, it doesn't mean it was the beginning of time, truly the beginning of everything. And this is why we need a little better word than cosmos to talk about it. So I'm gonna go ahead and let's go with this conversation. Let's imagine, for the sake of conversation, that theists are right, that there was some kind of finite point in the past where everything had to come into being. But we need to, because we do know how the laws of science work a little bit better than this, we understand that this is not really something we can talk about in this way. We need to come up with a little better phrasing than cosmos. So I like to use the phrase reality itself. And the reason why I like using this phrase is because when you use the word cosmos, it tends to come with baggage that you're talking about just the material world itself. Like, it doesn't necessarily include mathematics or intangible laws of nature as well. So if you use the phrase reality itself, it's a little more descriptive and it allows to cover everything. Now, what do I mean by everything? When I say reality itself, I mean time. Of course, I mean all the physical attributes you see, the stars, the galaxies, the multiverse, right? But I'm also talking about time. I'm talking about space. I'm talking about matter. I'm talking about energy, the fundamental forces of reality itself, and the very laws of nature. When I talk about the reality itself, I talk about everything that could exist, everything that does exist. And this is an important distinction that we're discussing this, because sometimes with the cosmological argument, we can get wrapped up in terminology and we can get wrapped up in the more talking about the physical properties. But there are a lot of immaterial properties in reality that aren't necessarily part of what we call the cosmos, the tangible parts, right? For instance, the very thing we're talking about here, which is this quote unquote law of this law of causality, this law that states that everything that begins to exist must have a cause. This is actually, if you think about it, this idea of causality is actually one of the laws of nature, right? In our reality, and this is why I was trying to give credit to the people who are using this argument, because it makes perfect sense. I understand where you're coming from, because everything we know in this reality tells us that every event has to have a cause. And so when we're looking at this argument, it does make sense on the surface level. When it's very that's why it's such a compelling argument, because we understand that, like, how can you have something happen without a cause in this reality? So everything it tells us, hey, look, if that's the case, then we must have a cause for the beginning of everything. But I want to bring it back to the graph here. So I redid the graph a little bit differently, because what I wanted to point out here is, if we use a model like this, it actually encapsulates the concept that the theists are trying to get to. What they're really saying, they're not really pointing to the beginning of everything, because like I said, we could have a multiverse, and the multiverse by definition doesn't have a beginning. But what they want to do is they want to take it a step, because this is, as we're talking about multiverses, the whole argument for cosmology has gotten adapted to include the multiverse, in saying, well, look, yes, even if we included this multiverse, you still have to explain how it all started. You have to explain where everything came from, right? And so there's a huge presupposition in this argument that I think is the Achilles heel. It's a huge problem, and the presupposition in this argument is that it's possible for there to have been a state of nothingness. And I think this is a major problem, not only because it doesn't make logical sense, because how can you have a true state of nothingness, right? I mean, think about it. What is this? What is all this white space? What is nothing? What does it mean to have none of these items? What does it mean to have truly nothing? You take away reality itself? You take away time? Take away space, you take away matter, you take away energy, you take away the fundamental forces, and you take away, this is the most important part, the very laws of nature themselves. What exactly does this mean? What is this nothing? You have to forgive me for my, I think my messengers went off. And this is where we're getting to the heart of this discussion. What does it mean to have nothing? Is that even a thing? And this is one of the problems that modern science has with this idea that you can't really even have a state of nothingness by definition, because guess what? As soon as you start thinking about it, it's no longer nothing. It's something. So, for instance, try it yourself. Try to think of nothing. You can't. Because as soon as you start thinking of nothing, you're thinking of something, right? As if something has any type of defined characteristics, it's not truly nothing, is it? But let's go with the theist argument that there's a possibility to have a true state of nothingness, right? And that because of that, this is what they use as an argument for God, that you have to have some type of explanation for everything that we see. So let's go with this. So let's set aside the question if this is even possible. What does this actually mean? What it means is that everything is off the table, including the very laws of nature that we're discussing. And this is the Achilles heel of the entire cosmological argument. Because if we accept the premise that everything is off the table, including the laws of nature, you have a major problem. Remember the law of causality we talked about earlier, and this is the whole basis for the argument. In other words, you have to have an explanation for the first event, because everything we know of requires explanation. Well, remember, this is it. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The cause began to exist, thereby the universe has a cause. This is that argument. Check this out. Boom. That law is gone. It's off the table. You can't use that law anymore. So what does this mean? What does it mean to have a state in which no laws exist, including this very law that they're referring to? It means the law of causality didn't yet exist. And there is literally, and this is an important part here, no reason that reality itself couldn't simply come into existence without any cause. Now, I want to pause there. I want you to reread that, because this is the crux of the counter argument. If the law of causality didn't exist, as theists are trying to propose, then there is literally no reason that reality itself couldn't simply come into existence without any cause. Now, for some of you guys, this is going to go right over your head. This was a mind-blowing experience. When I mention this to people, it goes right over their head. It's without seeing it and seeing the words, people have a hard time connecting to this. Think about this. There is no reason that reality itself couldn't come into existence without any cause. In fact, since the law of causality supposedly didn't exist, according to theists, reality itself coming into existence without any cause was not only potential, and this might blow some of your minds, but it was inevitable. Think about it. If you suppose that there was ever a state where nothing was somehow existent, which is a contradiction in itself, there were no laws to govern it, then reality itself coming into existence without a cause was not only a potential, but it was inevitable. Because by definition, anything could happen without any reason whatsoever. You could have events that occur with no cause, like reality itself. Now, I want to let that sink in for you guys for a moment about the inevitable nature of reality itself being its own cause. And this is a big idea to wrap your mind around. Don't believe me? Answer this question. If we assume, as creationists do, that there was somehow a state of nothingness without anything, including the very laws that we use to understand reality, what reason can you give to show that reality requires a cause? And this is the crux. This is the important question here. What reason can you give to show that reality requires a cause? I'd love to hear your responses in the comments section. But remember, you can't use any reason within reality itself to justify your response, because at least theoretically, such laws didn't yet exist. So you can't point to anything within this reality to justify your answer. And what you're going to find is that you get stuck, because everything breaks down when you remove everything from the equation. Remember, this is assuming the approach that theists are taking is correct. This is assuming that there was a point where nothing existed. Now, remember, this is not science. This is not the idea. Science does not propose this concept. In fact, science has some problems with this, because this seems to break some of the laws of thermodynamics. It just does. And, so this is what we're talking about here is completely theoretical, right? But what it does is it flips the argument right on its head. It actually shows that there is a problem with not only the conclusion of the cosmological argument, but also the premises. Scientists, a lot of scientists now are coming to accept the concept that reality itself may be a self-perpetuating construct. In other words, that it just may go on and on forever with no beginning and no end. Now, for many of us, this is very hard for us to grasp, but the reality is, that reality is oftentimes stranger than our greatest fictions. And one of the cool things about when I became an atheist and walked away from my faith is I started to be able to understand concepts like this for the first time. And I remember hearing a comedian who spoke on this. He talked about his experience coming out as an atheist. He's like, yeah, I just started learning cool shit. Like, I was like, oh, that's how mountains were formed? You know, and I know it sounds trivial for some of you who had a more secular upbringing and education, but for many of us who were born and raised in religious institutions and backgrounds, we really didn't believe that stuff. We didn't understand. It wasn't really part of what we were hearing stories about talking snakes. We were hearing stories about these mystical creatures and mystical stories and these essentially magical stories. And that's what impressed us. But now as an atheist, I look at this stuff and it blows my mind. It blows my mind. Like, thinking about how we are here and how all of this has come together, to me is amazing. And to me, the mystery of it is what's exciting, because we really don't know what the fundamentals are about reality. We may never know. But the idea behind science is that we are at least going to ask the questions. We're going to push the envelope. And if it appears that reality itself had some type of beginning, well, there's no as I've shown you here, there's no reason to believe that you need a God to explain that. Reality itself can be its own explanation. Just like in life, your meaning and purpose coming from some being above you who created you, that's not meaning and purpose. Meaning and purpose is what you make of your life and what you want your life to be known for. And I hope this video helps enlighten you to the cosmological argument, helps you understand some of the major flaws in it, and helps you see through, honestly, the bullcrap that gets pushed down our throats from religious apologists who are trying to justify the unjustifiable. And I want to thank you so much for watching this video. Please, if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please like and subscribe, and share it with somebody you know who maybe has talked about this argument, who has shown you videos where people are like trying to use this argument in different formats to try and maybe it helps you, because honestly, the cosmological argument is a very intense argument, and it's also very it can be overwhelming for people who haven't really thought through the basics of it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you around. Keep it positively atheist, everyone, and have a good evening.